Attention, attention please. Stand by for another episode of
When Humanists Attack.
Hi, this is Chris West, the Pontificator, and I welcome you to When Humanists Attack interview with Robert Anthony Gibbons on why has it taken so long for Black Lives to Matter. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We're really glad to have you, and thank you for taking the time out to spend time with us and share with us your experience.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you. I like to just, pay honor and homage to my mother, Dorothy, to my father, Robert, to my grandmothers, Versie and Maddie, and to my grandfathers, Sammy and Jethro Robert. Thank you.
That gives us a good lead in because we want to start off just by asking you about the things that make you who you are now. What's your history? Where did you start? Where were you born? Tell us a little about that.
Well, I was born on the southern shores of Lake Okeechobee, a little town called Belle Glade, Florida. It is in the backdrop of Palm Beach. More people are familiar with Palm Beach, the glitter, the fame of the beach and the wealthy and the elite. But I grew up in the most western part of the county. If you go out Lake Okeechobee, all the way out to the end of Lake Okeechobee, Okeechobee Road, as we call it, that's where Belle Glade is.
My understanding is that's a very specific kind of a place because in the 1920s, the government engaged in a process of draining the swamps around the lake in order to provide new places for agriculture.
Yes, my grandparents came from Georgia. And if you understand the migrant history of the United States, they moved on the migrant trails in search of work. So that's how they ended up in Belle Glade. And they actually resided there my entire life. So I did have a great grandmother that I knew. She lived right across the border from Tallahassee, Florida, in a little place called Bainbridge. But even in the summertime, my grandparents would follow the migrant trails back to Georgia and work in the cornfields in southern Georgia. I know because I did it alongside with them.
Until what age were you actually working in the fields with your parents?
At least until 13 and 14. And I want to tell you, Chris, I had so many nightmares of corn and celery. And I mean, it was just so overwhelming. But my grandmother told me, she said that your great grandmother Minnie is going to lose her house. So we have to go to Bainbridge, Georgia this summer, and we have to help her. And you're the only one that will help me. And my brother was much bigger than me. He was much more mature, much more athletic. But the Florida heat and the Georgia heat was just so overwhelming. When he did enter the fields, he couldn't take it. I mean, my mother would tell me to get up 6 o'clock in the morning to cut the grass because by 8 a.m. it's 103 degrees. So you can imagine enduring that Florida heat in the fields all day, especially during high noon. I would like to share from close to the tree. Hook. My grandmother would take us across the Georgia line every summer as if we were migrant workers traveling the back roads from Okeechobee to Tallahassee through chicken coops and fruit stands. And the elements change from tropical to deciduous, from dirt to clay, from corn to tobacco to corn. Winding the black bottom, she would batter, dressing them in flour, smothering them in her power, placing them in rectangular pans, covering them in aluminum foil, the toil of the gravy, packing them in her beige Buick, the Florida sun. Through it, she knew, she did not tell. She clears her mind of doubt. She held the steering wheel, shifting it to the right, making it there before dark. Thank you.
Your family comes from migrant workers?
Yes.
And they moved from Georgia into middle Florida, I guess they call it, Belle Glade.
Yeah, but Belle Glade was a total segregated place. I lived on the black side of town. Everybody I knew was African American. And we did know other people of other races and other nationalities, but they didn't live on our side of town. Belgrade was segregated by Main Street. And so other people lived on the other side of town, and we lived on one side of town. And Belgrade was segregated my entire life. High schools were totally segregated. Stores were totally segregated. Everything I experienced in my life was totally segregated. And that wasn't, I'm not saying that to make it bad, but it limits you. It's a narrow way of understanding and tolerating other people, or other people understanding who we are and where we came from and what our traditions are, because most of the other people attended private school on the other side of the city.
I looked at the statistics just earlier. Right now, migrant workers in the town you grew up in are making $25,000 a year, and they're working their butts off to make just that.
Exactly. So how about 5 cents a box? And my grandmother was dignified. I mean, she was a dignified woman. She was the supervisor of the corn truck. That's how I know about the cornfields. Because she was in supervisory position, she could bring me and my brother along if he could last. You know, so I would learn the machination of packing corn. And at that time, it was only 5 cents a box. And so you see people on the corn truck packing 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 boxes of corn to make the money they could. Total peonage, total plantation system, you know, owned by large farmers. They never intermingled. We never knew. We never had a history, but we had pride. We had spirit. I had a grandmother that was very glorified. She was a religious woman, but she would take me to Georgia during the summer, and she would take me to the burial grounds of my ancestors, and she would tell me, this is your great-grandfather, John Hanford. He walked from a plantation from Virginia here to Georgia. We grew up behind the Levee plantation. So we might have been related to them. So she was building this history. She was building this energy in me. And I feel like I'm the bearer and the carrier of this history, because it was not informed in school. There was no pride in not only African-American history, but Native American history. The names Okeechobee and Loxahatchee and Appalachie and Pahokee, all of those names, we had no knowledge. We had no knowledge. You know how knowledge is power. So we had no history. And so this is the type of life that I've tried to create as a poet and writer, to bring this history, to elevate the Glades and what the Glades, the terrible impact, but also the prideful impact that is made on my background. The title of this poem is called Home, and it has the epigraph by James Baldwin. The epigraph says, any writer, I suppose, feels that the world into which he was born is nothing less than a conspiracy against the cultivation of his talent, which attitude certainly has a great deal to support it. On the other hand, it is only because the world looks on his talent with such frightening indifference that the artist is compelled to make his talent important. James Arthur Baldwin. Home. Who said we did not receive the death penalty at birth? Our skins bruised by the Florida sun. It is a race and a bean field, a trace and a sugar mill, and yet we are under control and submission. The deadbeat and the dark feet ones that dangle with arms of machetes. And you still do not understand there are no Glades Day for us, only night and purple stalks and pink ghettos and blue stores. And there are urinals on the outside, tribunals for the smallest crime. And there was no equality on the other side of Lake Shore. And I'm not sure I know 50 died with arthritis and 50 more on the dialysis machine. But all excuses are nailed to the cross, said the preacher. Well, I do not believe everything the preacher says. I had to learn on my own, and this is not easy. I know segregation.
Beautiful. Your family and the people around you are saying, we're not going to let you erase us.
Yes. And that's the legacy that I want to live. And I want to say one other thing, Chris, because I've never really been involved in an interview like this, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you asking these questions because Belle Glade has really been the hand-me-down of the county. Of course, you know about glittering Palm Beach and West Palm Beach and
Jupiter.
Jupiter, Florida, and our mayor Bloomberg has a $10 million compound in Wellington, Florida. All of those places are in Palm Beach. Or the beauty of Palm Beach will be Palm Beach, but Boca Raton will be better, you know, and all that kind of wealth and glitter and all the kinds of things that you hear over the years about Palm Beach County, but you never hear about the Glades.
Never.
You never hear about Belle Glade, but we were always sent the hand-me-downs. We were always had the last in the coffers, the treasures, the educational treasures. Teachers had to come to Belle Glade. I'm talking about teachers of other color had to come to Belle Glade to get their bones, if you know what I'm saying, to break in, if you get what I mean. And
Yep.
and it's a struggle. So we always suffered. My community always suffered. It was a big thing that I was fortunate that I had a mother that was a teacher. So our street had a sidewalk, but most streets didn't.
Tell me a little more about your mother's role in the community as a teacher, and more importantly, the influence that had on you.
Well, my mother went to a little HBU, as we say, historically Black college in South Carolina. My mother had 7 brothers. And so, of course, my grandfather was insistent that everyone work. But because my mother was the only girl in that family, he had a liking for her. He was very interested in her pursuing a college education. So out of her 7 brothers, my mother was the only one that had that opportunity to go to college. So she ended up in this little school called Allen University, where she met my father at Benedict College. And both of those colleges are historically Black colleges in Columbia, South Carolina. And so that's where they met. But she did have this fortune to come back and educate her children and stress the importance of education to us. She would sing to us and read to us. And she exposed me to Langston Hughes. So she would read to us early and encourage and write letters on the walls and words and make sure that we would give us as much as we can in the limited environment that we grew up in. And she knew. She knew how limited it was, but she tried her best, as most teachers did at that time for me, is expose us as much as we could.
Your mother came from very little, and through the sacrifice of her family was able to get a degree at a historically Black university.
Right.
And instead of going to a large city,
Right.
instead of going to another place, she
Right.
decides to go home.
Yes.
She decides to go back and
Well, she
give
had
back
to
to the
go home.
community. Yeah.
She became pregnant with me at Allen University. My father was at Benedict, and they had to get married because at that time, the strict background of my grandparents, but they both did finish college. They both became teachers. And it's just an interesting side note. They're in their 70s now. And after many years of separation, they finally come back together and they're trying to rekindle that love. And that makes me feel so good because I'm their oldest. So they're coming back together. Robert and Dorothy are finally trying to get back together.
And that's very sweet.
Yes.
So tell me about your siblings. I just want to know, I think my experience as one of 3 and my experience with other people who are only children, the number of siblings you have can have a pretty big impact on how you turn out as a person.
Yeah, I have 1 brother and 3 sisters. 1 passed away in 2015. There are 4 of us left. My brother Carl, my sister Natasha, and my sister Latangela. And all of them are educators or in the education field. So that idea of giving back to the community was really instilled in us. And I've taught back and forth on the college level and the high school level, but I'm a poet. So, yeah.
So the background is clear.
Yeah.
You have this very strong, very proud family behind you in this impoverished place where, as a pair of teachers, your parents would have had some status, I imagine.
Yes, yes. I lived on a street where the sidewalk is very, very important. That's why I brought the sidewalk up. The owners that lived on those streets had to pay for that sidewalk to be installed in Belle Glade. And so teachers and firemen and morticians and all of those kinds of people lived on my street. So my street was very significant because I could walk to the elementary school where my mother taught, which was right up the street. And she taught there for 35 years as a third grade teacher. She would take us to West Palm Beach. She would take us out to dinner. We would go to restaurants because she was constantly a teacher. It was not something that she just did in the classroom for a job, but she modeled this. She modeled this type of behavior because she wanted her children to know that there's a bigger world and there's a better world out there. But we were so far west to Lake Okeechobee that we had those back roads. The back road to US 27 led to the back way to Fort Lauderdale or led to the back way to Miami so we could get there quicker. But those trips were big trips for us. You know, those were big time trips because we were going to the city. So she would take us and expose us. She gave me violin lessons. She made sure I had piano lessons. She made sure I read. She made sure I ate 3 meals a day while working on her graduate degree. And she had 5 children. And we had a very, very strong family because my grandmother would take care of us while my mother was in graduate school at night. So there were so many wonderful things, but then there were so many oppressive things. Growing up in a segregated plantation-like system, all we knew was the sugar mill. That was the big industry in Belle Glade. And most people we knew, my uncles, my cousins, family, friends, everybody that I knew, they had some kind of connection to the sugar mill. And all we knew, it was the famous Wedgeworth family or the Hand family, the wealthy millionaires that own these companies, you know, Big Sugar or all of these kinds of places that own the sugar, but we experienced none of the economic glorification of that, only the peonage. The next poem is called Florida. All these years, we have this love-hate relationship. And as a child, I played hide and seek among your cherry bushes, squirting red pepper into my eyes, eating of your divine sunshine. Now my mouth salivates as I bite your navel. I suck every juice from your citrus. I still nibble your breast, as rotund, as profound as grapefruit. And I claim you as grand matriarch. Your civil locks remind me of moss near the border as I ride your Biscayne Bay Road in search of myself. The promise to leave, but your roots are too deep. The longing for you too steep. Now my eyes water for Jacksonville's spine, each curve as old as the Spanish ancestors, as primitive as the doubloon, the little red schoolhouse that gave me birth, baptized me from the fountain of youth, kissing Tampa Bay's mouth, intersecting the skyway, you, the Southern woman, the 8-hour ride down your orgasm, from Tallahassee to Miami, from deciduous to tropical, from heat to hotter. I want to take my clothes off in a topless ghoul night. I'll stop there.
I love it. One of the things I uncovered when I was doing research was that Edward R. Murrow did a documentary on Belle Glade, and it's called The Harvest of Shame. I haven't seen it yet, but it was the last documentary he did before he left CBS, and it shook the country up. It was one of those aha moments where someone in a position of privilege uses that privilege to uncover some of the injustice that the system was actively putting in place and was going to be continuing to put in place even after the civil rights movement. This movie was made in 1960. This is 8 years before the civil rights legislation was passed.
That's amazing.
So deep Jim Crow still happening right then and there. And I bring that up partially because I think that it's a good idea to watch. Just, I mean, you said when you heard about it, wow, I'd love to see what my town was looking like back then. But I just want to point to this being another moment where white America was given an opportunity to look at the way that we were treating a group of people.
Exactly.
And there was a bit of a outrage
Right.
when that was shown, but that outrage moved on and forgot about it.
Yes. One incident happened in my entire life that always come back, and I tend to just get so sad and emotional about it. And it's that my mom wanted me to have piano lessons so bad. And so she located this teacher on the other side of Main Street, a wonderful piano teacher. And right now, I don't remember her name. I'll call her Miss Connor. So Miss Connor, the piano teacher, said, yes, Robert can come. He's a very precocious young man. He can come and take piano lessons. And so my mom would regularly take me to her house, drive me to the front door, wait for me to go in. And one day, her husband had not met me yet. I had been taking piano lessons with Miss Connor for like 6 months. And the husband had not met me yet, but he took her into that back room and he said, if you teach that N-word piano lessons, you're done. I heard it. I went back home and told my mom, but she never responded to me because I was very small. She never responded about it, but I never went back to that teacher's house again. And I thought the woman was a wonderful, wonderful educator and exposing me to piano lessons at a very early age, because I was like 4 or 5, and I had this gift for music. Eventually, I began to take up saxophone or violin, but I did have a gift for music. And so that kind of stopped that right there.
I know that you said that your parents are very religious and your grandparents are very religious. What was going on inside of you, the understanding of your relationship with your parents and relationship to your belief
Right.
as you got older and realizing that you were gay?
Right. That is, Chris, that's the hardest conflict that I've come in contact with in my entire life. And that's the whole idea about religion and how religion dominates and dominated the very atmosphere of where I came from, So there was church on Wednesday night, there was church on Friday night, there was church on Sunday, there was church on Sunday night. And my grandmother, again, the matriarch that she was big in the church. So she required that we attend church with her all of those nights. So I grew up in a very strict apostolic Christian, which cut themselves off from the world. It was the dress style. It was no drinking, no smoking, no jewelry, no makeup. It was that type of background. I come from a strict religious background. So it had a deep impression on how I viewed the world, especially with the undergirding of the sexuality hidden beneath all of this. The fear, the secrecy, the lying to cover up who I really was. There was never any liberation for me. My first time experiencing a gay club or being with a group of gay people was when I went to college. So there you have it. That I didn't even know things like that existed. That's just how my parents tried to keep us innocent, but also keep us separate from everybody else.
Tell me, if I don't mind me being a bit probing,
right,
about developing your sexuality as a gay Black man in Belgrade in high school.
It was hell, Chris. It was hell. That's why I had to hide it from my parents. And my mother would often question, because she was an educated woman, so she wasn't dumb, or she wasn't far behind. She had been off. She had come to New York. She had, my father grew up in New Jersey, so she had been in New York with him. She had been places. She had seen things, but I guess she wanted me to open up on my own. And then she had this kind of protectiveness where she just really wanted me to verbalize it. And I never would. I lived a very sad middle school and high school life. Even into college, when I even began to open up and liberate myself a little bit, it was still difficult. And I don't want people to think that it has to do with my parents, because it did not. It had to do with the environment I grew up in. It had to do with no exposure to nothing, to no culture or anything like that. Nobody that I could look at it as a role model. So I had to create this whole persona within myself and lie and bury the secrets that entire time. She knew, I think, and people knew, but they would never speak of it because I was their child, and they would never address. I was my grandmother's first grandchild, so she was a very religious, very stately woman. So they wouldn't address it, but people knew. It wasn't a hidden secret. But in the Black world, it's complicated. That's the only word I can use for that.
Yeah, because you have this very strong, deep religious founding and foundation.
Yes.
But you also have these people that you know are gay.
Yes.
And
In the
you
church,
love them.
in the school, in this community, into this, into that. Yes. But you can never, ever talk about it.
Yep. I remember I went to high school in Harlem in New York City in the late 70s and early 80s. And I remember the senior year, the last month or two of senior year, all of these friends of mine came out as gay, kind of like they kind of like got in a room together and said, we're coming out. Forget this. We're coming out now. We've got a couple of months left. And a lot of them were from the African-American community and were very, very deeply involved in church choirs and all of that.
Yeah.
And coming out was a real risk for them. I did a little research on Belgrade, and one of the very harrowing statistics was the official unemployment rate in 2010, which was the last census. It is a bit old to be sure. Official unemployment rate was 15%.
Wow.
But the mayor said the actual unemployment rate is more like 40%. And 50% of the African-American youth in Belgrade has been in prison.
Yes.
So the basic setup for life that you were given.
Yes.
Tell me how you moved on from being in Belgrade.
It was so difficult. It was so difficult. Religion, Blackness, sexuality, all of those things that tend to oppress or trap, those kinds of things have never been addressed. If we didn't have people like teachers or community leaders that would set up a little baseball camp to take us to see the Mets when they came, because all the baseball teams came to Palm Beach County for spring training. And that was one little way that as a boy growing up, I was exposed to liking baseball at an early age, because I had the opportunity to join this little camp in the park, and the coach would take us, those kind of little lights. And this is why your whole question about Black Lives Matter, it means so much, because people in the community, certain people in the community, have known all their lives how important it is, the secret gifts of charity, to send us to camp or to send us on a trip to Washington, D.C. I was a safety patrol in third grade, and it was only $75, but my mom couldn't afford to send me to Washington, D.C., but somebody secretly paid that money so that I could go to Washington, D.C. It was just like these little lights along the way that say that there are people out there, and this could be of any color, any race, who knows, that life in general matters. But specifically for me, African-American life matters, because I come from total devastation, total erosion, and most of the time, total death. I know many people that have had gifts and genius, and they never had an opportunity to experience that because they're so beat down, they're so oppressed, they're so depressed. The beating down of the 1,000 Sons of Florida has just devastated the very fiber of their lives.
There's a moment where you're in the last year of high school.
Yeah.
And your mom comes to you, or it's in the air. What's the next step here, Robert?
I come from a very, very very smart siblings. You know, my brother's PhD. I'm going to talk a little bit about him because his story is very significant to my legacy. But, you know, I, being the oldest, knew that I was going to go to college for my brothers and sisters so that they would have that example. So I ended up going to college at Florida A&M in Tallahassee. In the year, there was no question that I was going to go to college, but how I was going to take this secret life, this oppressed, depressed, half the time, suicidal life on the Tallahassee would change everything for me. Just like I said, this would be the first time that I experienced a gay club or gay people or somebody that was interested in me or how I looked, because I always thought that I was a misfit. The guys in my neighborhood, they weren't going to hang with me. They weren't going to be my friend. So I was mostly alone in my entire life. I can hear my mom's voice now. Robert, go outside. I bought you a bicycle. Why won't you? But I was afraid. I was afraid because I knew I was going to be ridiculed or put down or beat down. And I couldn't tell her, because if I told her, then that would lead to the next question. So I lived a life of secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get to Tallahassee and finally the secrets can come out.
Could come out there, but
yeah. Well, obviously not still at home, right?
Still hidden from her, you know.
Yeah.
Still hidden from my grandmother, the evangelist. Still hidden from all the religious folks down south, because I didn't want them to know that I was kind of coming of age, kind of finding myself, kind of figuring out that, okay, I can be this way. I'm not the only one in the world that has this feeling on the inside. I thought it was a sin. I thought it was wrong to be this way. I thought that I should be like my uncles or the people up the street that had a house full of children and a flatbed truck and a house with 10 pigs and a dog. You know what I'm saying? That's the way I thought that I should be. But no, my life was different.
Robert, this has been a wonderful discussion.
Right. I want to plug my book before we go, right?
No question.
In 2012, I published the first book by Three Rooms Press. It's called Close to the Tree. And in 2019, Poets Wear Prada Press out of Hoboken, New Jersey, my dear friend Roxanne Hoffman published this small chapbook of my graduate thesis called Flight.
Thank you so much. I just want to let everybody know that there are links to a couple of Robert's poems that are on YouTube, and we'll have the names of the books that he just put up. Those will be under the comments and more information on the YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Thank you again. This is Chris West for When Humanists Attack.
Thank you.
And this is part 2 of our series, Why Is It Taking So Long for Black Lives to Matter?
Thank you. Wow. Hey.